Hey guys, Tim Adams here. We have Paul Allen Clifford and Michael Ray. We're going to be talking about analog mixers and digital mixers in the audio realm. And we're going to start things off by talking about the pros and cons of analog mixers. Michael, take it away.
Okay, I'm just gonna get my microphone on. Can you guys hear me? Um, well, we're gonna start off with the pros and cons of digital boards and analog boards, and I want to start with digital boards. And the most used one now, I would think, as far as a digital interface per se, is probably the PreSonus. We use a PreSonus. I started off with analog boards, but when I moved over to the PreSonus, it was a little bit of a learning curve. Like I had to learn how everything was set up and stuff, and that's one of the pros is that once you learn it, it's very easy to move and maneuver around and add effects and do some precision EQing. It has the I don't think it was first introduced that way, but it does now have the app you can get on your iPad, your iPhone to control volumes, EQs, and stuff like that. And you just you walk around the room and get like the perfect sound that you possibly could. Just walking around the room, like getting a good stereo sound, and that's one of the pros that this board has. But one of the cons is I've noticed this. We used it for our live recording was that, well, first when I noticed these boards came out, I thought to myself, I said, there must be a reason why they're cheaper than even Behringer's. They're cheaper than Yamaha's, the more higher quality boards, digital boards, even Mackie. And then I come to find out, I said, after I listened to the recording, I had noticed like the preamps. I've mentioned this before to Tim, is the preamps aren't their best. PreSonus does have high-end preamps in their other boards called the iMax. I think it is iMax, something like that. But they're very pristine sounding preamps, very clean, a lot of headroom. You don't have to cut the volume up very much. It's just very clear sounding. And I noticed that the PreSonus doesn't have that, but they did that to keep the cost down. And it would have been probably double or triple the price if they put these preamps in there. But that's really the only con that I've seen about the that digital board. But also, I'm not sure, but I think that even the EQ is digital, so you can kind of hear the EQ is digital when I start playing around with it. But it suffices. Not your average user's not going to know that anyway. The people that don't know nothing about audio, they just want it to be musical, pretty much, and that was PreSonus's PreSonus's goal with this board. But then they're made for portable churches, pretty much. They're not made for, and some people have used them stationary, but I wouldn't encourage any stationary church to use it because they can get something a little better, such as from Yamaha. Even Behringer makes a better one. But yeah, that's the only cons I can say about it. Something like the PreSonus and some other digital boards is that the preamps aren't typically that great, and I understand why they're not going to be that great. You guys can input something. Come on, mic off.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for that. And I think what you're going after was the X-Max preamps, and but you were close. Good job. So as far as a category, digital mixers offer an incredible amount of power as far as processing and signal management, and as Michael was mentioning, remote control through a Wi-Fi connection on a tablet, an iPad, iPhone, that kind of thing. And where that becomes really powerful, that kind of wireless control, is with monitor. And I don't know about you, but in my experience doing live sound, one of the hardest jobs is to get a good monitor mix that everybody is happy with, because you're either limited on how many auxiliary sends that you can put out there, or aux mixes, or you're limited by the number of monitors that you have on the stage. And so that means musicians have to share, and just like witnesses at an accident, you get 10 witnesses, you're going to get 10 different versions of what happened. Same thing with musicians and performers. You're going to get 10 different perspectives of what that mix should sound like. And sometimes there's just nothing you can do about that. I think that's a really big drawback with analog audio mixers, is the fact that you're usually very limited without, spending a lot of money, which churches don't have, in order to get the higher auxiliary send count. And so a lot of times you got 4 aux outs, and that's it. And you have to make that work. Sometimes you'll get 6. Very rarely you'll see 8 in the kind of channel counts that small to medium-sized churches are using. And it's a really big drawback. It's a really big struggle. However, one of the pros for analog boards is that they tend to sound warmer, is kind of the adjective that's used. And whereas digital boards, especially when they first came out, sounded very clinical, very cold. There was no personality to the sound, and they just were not user-friendly at all. When you're making the transition from analog to digital, and you're used to row after row after row of aux out, EQ, buttons for pads, and roll-off filters, and pan, that kind of thing, and you go to a digital board, and all of a sudden you don't have rows and rows and rows of knobs. You have some knobs, a lot of buttons, a big display, and you're not really sure what to do with it. And so I think one of the big cons for digital boards, especially some of the more expensive boards that have automated faders and layers, is transitioning from a linear mindset. Okay, so channels 1 to 24, let's say. Okay, and they're all laid out left to right. Makes sense. You learn one channel strip, you know them all. To what's now a nonlinear vertical mindset with digital. So I've got 16 faders on a 32 channel board. That doesn't make sense up here because I'm used to seeing 32 channels laid out, right? But now I have 16, and I got to hit a button to get to channels 17 through 32. And when that happens, automated faders, they remember the position that all the channels are set at as far as the faders. They'll jump on you. And it's kind of comical, I'll admit, because when you're used to it and you're training volunteers that are not, almost every time they go, ah, because they think the board's possessed or something. But it's just not a mindset that a lot of people can jump into immediately. Now, it's one thing if you're starting from that mindset. If you're starting with a blank slate, new person, never worked audio before, it's a lot easier to teach them that because they don't know any different. Whereas if you got somebody who's coming from 20 years of analog mixers, jumping into that kind of a mindset, that's going to be a really big challenge for them. So some of the other cons that I can see on both sides, like the learning curve again. Interfaces are very, very different between digital manufacturers. Presonus is different than Midas, and Midas is different than Yamaha, and Yamaha is different than Behringer. And you got price points all over the place, you've got features all over the place. You really got to do your homework so that you're actually comparing oranges to oranges. Whereas with the analog world, I know if I'm going to get a 16-channel mixer with 16 inputs, I got 4 aux sends, and I got 2 main outs. That's easy to compare, right? Maybe one board has a sweepable mid, where I can, on the EQ, I can adjust the frequency that the mid-range, is affecting. Kind of limited as far as the technical challenge of comparing that. So those are some of my thoughts. And I know I apologize that they're scatterbrained, but hey, we're just kind of shooting the breeze here. Paul, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that there are a few things to keep in mind. Anytime you take something from the analog world, which is where our brains and ears and eyes are, by the way. So if someone says, oh, well, that's analog, so it's bad or it's old. Keep in mind, to hear it, to see it, it has to become analog. But with all that said, anytime you go from that to digital, there is going to be some difference, and the question you need to ask yourself is what am I getting in return from for what I'm losing? So in the case of an analog mixer, you are getting a smaller footprint when you go to digital. You're getting a lot of effects that you probably don't have because you didn't have the budget to buy every single effect that you wanted. Per channel EQs that are not just 3 different knobs, or on the outside maybe 5 different knobs, but really tight ability to change. Just you don't want 1 kilohertz. Well, we can make just 1 kilohertz go away. We can do anything that you want. Oh, let's add reverb for this one part of this one song on this channel right here and none of the others. And you can just do things like that with the digital board that you can't do with an analog board without spending a whole lot of money. And as you say, for people that are purists, that are audiophiles, they will hear the difference. But for those of us, and I include myself in this because I'm more of a video guy than an audio guy, that don't have the golden ear, I only hear the new effects used better. I don't hear the, this is encoded a little bit less than what I would want it to be. So it's really a trade-off. Now, I will say that one thing that I noticed immediately, and if you're used to running an analog board, you've probably run into this. At practice, you get everything set perfectly, and then you show up on Saturday afternoon, Sunday morning, whenever your church is, and the singers swear to you that someone must have been in there and monkeyed with the settings because it's wrong. It's just all wrong. Well, with the digital board, they still do that, but you hit the recall button and you say, really? Because it's exactly the way it was. So I'm happy to change it, but nothing has changed from the electronics. It could be humidity in the air. It could be where things are placed in the room, but it's not our electronics. We didn't change anything, and I know that it didn't change because I saved it before I left. It has the time that I saved it, so I know that I saved it then. I think it does that. I might have just made that up, but the musicians don't know it, so maybe you say that. I don't know, and you can just bring it up exactly, and you can have. I know in the old days, if you had a certain EQ setting for a certain singer, if you didn't write it down, if they were off for a month, sorry, you had to figure it out again. Whereas now you can just store that in a preset, and Becky comes up to sing, you hit Becky's preset, and her EQ is exactly as it was a month prior. So it's really a trade-off, but it's really a wonderful technology. And if they could make a perfectly usable analog board that was as warm and rich but had all the cool features of a digital board where the settings are saved and the faders are motorized and it has all the effects and everything, now that would be quite something. But I bet that would also be something that your church couldn't even afford to think about because it would be so remarkably expensive.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So what Paul has kind of hinted at is what's called, presets, scene recall, that kind of thing, where the digital mixers are capable of recording and saving every setting of every parameter on the board. PreSonus, at this point, up until a recent announcement, didn't have what we call recallable preamps. So that gain knob way at the top, or trim, depending on the mixer that you're on, that was set manually. Now they've just released a mixer that's rack mountable, software driven, but you can use it as a stage box for a digital snake as well. Has recallable preamps, so that now is fully savable and that kind of thing. And the real power with digital mixers, in particular the PreSonus brand, and I'm sure others, is when you hook a computer up to it. So at that point, you also get, let's say you got a 32-channel mixer, right? And you hook a computer up to that via, whatever the proprietary, is it FireWire, USB, whatever the interface is. Now you have the capability of recording each track individually on that computer. We call it multi-tracking. Now that comes in really handy for churches that want to record their services, worship leaders that want to record the band so that they can see how they sounded. Maybe they have an original song and they really want to do like a single release of it, or start recording individual songs in a live environment so that they can release a CD of their own. Something like that. That's where that really comes in handy. You also, if you just want to record the pastor's sermon, and you maybe need to edit it, you don't have to record to a thumb drive. I mean, you can. Most digital mixers allow you to just plug in a thumb drive and get a stereo mix. But now it's already on the computer. You just saved yourself a step. The other advantage is that you get the library. So if all you need to do is save EQ of a particular pastor, like one of our pastors, I don't know why, but his voice in that space induces feedback. It just does. And it's not to say that he's not a good guy or there's anything wrong with him. It's just that's the result. And so having the ability to say, this is so-and-so's preset in the library, and saying, hey, you know what? He's speaking today. I don't have to go mess with a whole system configuration or a preset just for him. I can pull up my base configuration that everybody knows is working, and I can say, okay, drag, drop onto his channel. Or let's say that he starts talking, something goes wrong with his headset mic, and he has to get on a different microphone. I can copy and paste from the board without even the computer, from one channel to the other, all of that channel settings. And that's not just EQ, that's effects, that's compression, that's limiter. I mean, gate, if you have it, it's awesome. It's incredibly powerful. And so, they replace racks and racks of outboard gear, lots of wiring that was complicated to figure out, especially for volunteers. It used to be really, really difficult to figure out, okay, if I want to apply this effect to that channel, I got to turn this up, and then I got to turn this return back up, and then that feeds into this, and then I got to turn that up, and then finally I get it to my main mix. Okay, it's great if you understand all that, but try teaching that to a volunteer. Whereas with digital mixers, it's a lot easier. And I think Michael probably has some comments about what we're talking about.
Okay. I haven't done any, since we started using the PreSonus, I haven't really done a lot of looking into what they have now, as far as because I think it's appropriate to say what they have now, compared to when the PreSonus came out. I think I respect for PreSonus for pushing other companies to produce more digital mixers at a more affordable price. I think the most commonly used digital board, which I think Paul had said it would be nice to have a mix of both worlds. Well, yeah, they make these boards, but just like I was looking now, they went down on the price a little bit. But just to get the Yamaha version of this, it's almost $10,000. That's a lot of money that a church doesn't. That's not including the speakers that you got to buy, the subs. That's not including like to really take the full potential of this board. You want nice microphones to justify these preamps and these nice things they got, and it gets really really expensive. But I was a little surprised. Now I'm now looking at Presonus, and now I think you said this, Tim, but now I just saw the studio. It's the Presonus Studio Live RM32. So basically, I guess they're getting rid of the full mixer thing, and they're just doing a rack. And you can either it doesn't look like an iPad, but it's you probably use just the iPad, and that communicates with the rack, or they got this I don't know what it is. I think it's by Windows, I guess. This huge tablet you just sit on the table, and it's just everything's it's digital, and it just controls the rack. I think, wow, that's only $2,000. I guess Presonus made that specifically for probably portable churches. It's because portable churches are getting a lot more out in America now, because I know that part, because I've seen portable churches just grow tremendously now because of what God's doing in this country. And I think it's amazing that Presonus is making great and pushing other companies to make them also. And then you also got Behringer, which they now just have just a mixer that just has the iPad on it, and then you got your channel inputs, and it's pretty much the same thing as the Presonus. I don't think it's probably not as great as the Presonus, probably because it's cheaper, but I think it's pretty cool. Mackey's got it now. Allen Heath is coming out with. Allen Heath is the most well-known, probably makes the best soundboards out there, in my opinion, as far as preamps and EQs and stuff. They're making one now that's affordable, and that's not high price. But I would guess the Yamaha is still the Mac Daddy that you want to get, but it's probably specifically for permanent churches. Like we have, I don't know if you guys know this church, but we have a church here in North Carolina called Elevation Church, and they grew huge church. And one of the first things the pastor said, we understand now why God told him this, but when they first started the church, he asked God, he's like, God, what's the first thing that we need to put they had like a $20,000 budget. They had all come together and scrambled the money together, and they're like, what's the first thing we need to buy? And they had told Steve Furtick, he prayed about it, and the Lord had told him, said, get a really nice Yamaha mixer. Like, what? That was the first thing God told them to buy. Was like, and now you understand why, because their church grew so big and they were stationary. Like, they really needed that board because they needed a great sound. And he explains why. He now understands why God chose him to get that board over anything else, And so I probably when I'm talking, but I think that it's a great idea that they're merging digital with analog, but you're getting the best of both worlds at the same time. When it first started off with digital, it had what I call a very flaky sound. Sometimes it wasn't even musical to me sometimes. And now you're mixing the best of both worlds. And then on top of that, Behringer makes it, it's called it's
X32.
The producer model, which I guess records your channels simultaneously all together. You'd have to really, that's a big thing a lot of churches forget, is like, oh, we want to record live, and they just assume that when they get these digital boards that it records the tracks individually, but not all of them do that, multi-track like that, which the Presonus does do that, which is great. But yeah, now I think it's awesome now that, another big thing coming out now is like a lot of churches are wanting to record their service and do mastered, they want to, do a master recording. And back in the, even the early 2000s, you couldn't do that, up to about 5 years ago, you really couldn't do that cheap, because you had to buy an analog board, then you had to buy a really nice interface with that, and a really nice computer to plug that in, and then you'd get a decent sound. But now, you can plug into something like a Presonus. It's just straight into your MacBook Pro, and you're done. Like, you're ready to go home and mix it just like that. And I've done it. it was amazing. Just to record your service and be ready to mix. And hey guys, we got an album. We just recorded this 2 weeks ago. So it's really great. That's all I got to say about that.
All right, fair enough. Paul, you want to talk about multi-track a little bit?
Yeah, just from a video standpoint, because that's my primary area, this ability that, as he says, not everyone has, but our audio console has, where you can record the individual tracks. We do that, and it's saved our bacon a couple of times because, at least right now, we're not live yet. It's the hope that soon for our satellite campus we will be live. But right now, we take the Saturday night service, I edit it, that's one of the things I get to do, and then send that on a hard drive to our satellite campus for Sunday morning. Well, we've got a bit of a problem in that the worship leader's voice at the satellite campus is a different range than the worship leader's voice at our main campus. So the worship leader at the satellite campus tends to sing in a different key. Most of the time that's not a big deal. But on occasion the pastor will want to end the sermon with a song. So the band starts playing at the end of the sermon, and what do you do when it's in the wrong key? And it's not like in a relative key where you can like just change it a little bit, and non-musical people have no clue. No one where there's clashing. So this saved our bacon a couple of times where we just took the audio from the board of the pastor only, and there was still a little background music in the background because, you know, his mic does pick up a little from the speakers in the house. But it was so much less than the mix that I was recording to, or I was editing off of, which had everything mixed together and mixed together well. With this, since we had just the individual pastor's track, we could, it was just basically some music in the distance, and if we played loud enough at the satellite campus, you really couldn't hear it. So that's what they did, and it made it so that we didn't have to like call the pastor back in. Hey, could you preach that last paragraph? Just and try and really get into it, just like you did. No, that's really not an option. So it really did help us in that situation where we had some audio that we needed to figure out a way to remix in only a couple of hours.
Yeah, it's always awesome when you get stories about how technology saved you. I think it's, unfortunately, we have a lot more stories where technology failed us, but it's certainly a great tool to have. You know, I definitely see the industry, as it were, heading towards digital, just as a standard, really. And whether you're coming in at, say, the entry level Behringer, Presonus, Mackie, or whether you're going Midas, Allen and Heath, even the Avid venue system, you know, if you can afford the bigger stuff, make sure that you're not spending money on features that you don't need now and in the future. But you know, definitely take a look at where you're going as a church, would be my recommendation, and figure out what your needs are going to be, you know, 5-10 years in the future. Because you make this kind of investment, you want a mixer that's going to last that long. Something to realize about the motorized faders, though, those, because they're motors, you know, they are going to break. And so if you're going to make that investment, then every year you're going to want to make an investment as far as, you know, maintaining that and making sure that it's not getting into a situation where it's going to let you down, it's going to break down, or the worst thing to happen is the motor disengages completely, and or it the fader just doesn't affect the sound anymore. I mean, that's certainly a situation that has come up, um, even though we're more or less in the, I would say, the toddler stage of digital audio mixing. Um, it is something. It's a machine. It breaks. So if you're going to make the investment, just like a car, you're going to have to also make the investment to keep it running. And just to clarify what Michael was talking about, yeah, the RM series from PreSonus, it was just announced last week, or a couple weeks ago. It's one of the two. And it is a rack-mounted solution. So all of your mic cables, your in and out, they go into this rack unit, and then you have a Cat5 cable that either runs back to an actual PreSonus mixer using what's called the AVB or the Dante protocols, which will be coming out later this year and early next year. Or you plug it into a wireless router and you have an iPad, or I believe the image that you were looking at, Michael, is a Windows PC. It's a touchscreen Surface that's like, I don't know, 22 inches wide or something. It's huge. So it's a really big tablet, essentially, but it is an actual full-featured Windows PC. And they have built from the ground up new software to run that, and the software looks pretty cool. My caution and concern is just with any software, they run on computers and computers lock up. And, I have to ask the question, what happens then? What are your options? Because if you're relying on software to run your entire house mix, and your software locks up and you got to reboot the computer, does the sound keep going? What happens if that occurs at a transition point? Do you have the touchscreen computer and an iPad, as backup? How are you going to think through that? It's not that I don't think it's a good solution. I just think that you got to think about what happens when think worst case scenario, right? Hope for the best, plan for the worst. I don't think PreSonus is necessarily stepping away from hardware mixers. I think they're simply responding to the industry saying, look, you need to have a digital snake of some kind. And they said, okay, well, we're going to build a digital snake, but we're going to make it a full-featured mixer too. So kind of an interesting approach. And again, Michael said it perfectly. PreSonus kind of driving innovation and making the other manufacturers go, huh, okay, that's how they're playing it. So I don't think there's any one cookie cutter mixer, analog or digital, that's perfect for every church. You need to look at, evaluate what your needs are now and in the future and decide which way you want to go. What do you guys think?
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. I wanted to add, you said, right, you asked a question, Tim, about, what if your software, it just bugs out. Next thing you know, you're in the middle of a service and your sound goes out. You don't want that happening. And because you have to reboot and stuff like that. I believe that is why, because I'm IT, I believe that is why the reason why they're really pushing these digital boards now, as far as the GUI goes, I think they were just kind of waiting for, one, the hardware to do it, and then also an operating system per se that is very solid, something that will not bug out, something that won't stop. And I believe that's when Apple stepped in, and I believe that Apple is a company that looks into the future of things like that. They're known to do that. If you look at these digital boards now, what are you going to see beside it? It's either going to be the iPhone or the iPad. And these companies trust Apple, one, because of how their their hardware is built around the operating system as opposed to Android. You probably will never see a mixture, control. You will, but I wouldn't trust Android. And I highly would never trust Windows with this situation, because last thing you want to be doing is being on that Presonus there. And I'm sorry, it's Windows, and you're gonna get pop-ups, and you inherited that when you get Windows. You'll be in the middle of a mix, and you run sound, and it's like, oh, we need to install Java. Why? It's like, I'm running sound. I don't care about Java. Now, I'm not sure. That's why I was looking at that touchscreen. That Presonus was like, please tell me that's not a Windows-based tablet. And I was like, not even Android. I was like, so maybe, I think that a lot of people will raise the question, why would they, come out with a 12-inch iPad now that Apple's talking about? Well, this is one of those reasons. They're seeing a reason to have these pads like that. So as far as something cutting out, like, I've used the iPad and I've never had issues with it. It's never shut down in the middle of me like I was trying to do a set. It's stable. I mean, think about this. Like, I use Aria. I told you guys I use Aria for recording on the fly, and I can record up to 20 tracks, man, on an iPad, not at 196K quality, with any preamp I want to, any like audio mixer I want to. It's fluid. It records straight to the flash drive. That I don't have to deal with any middleman as far as PC goes. I do not have to deal with Windows, and so I think these companies, they're just kind of waiting for that. Some other companies just catch up as far as like the GUI part about it and recording on the fly, and I think that's a reason why most of these digital boards are relying on either the inboard software or something external, and the only people they're going to trust is Apple, because Apple makes a very solid and stable operating system, both wireless and connected. So that's what I had to say about that.
That's fair. And, I tend to agree with you. I do know that there are people out there that will be watching this that will strongly disagree with you. And, that's okay. It's a toolbox. I think you should use the tool that you're comfortable with. Just realize that there are fallibilities, shall we say, on both sides. PC being it's an open system, it's more susceptible to blah, blah, blah. Apple being a closed system, being more susceptible to lack of user customizability, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. It's just, it is what it is. I've said my piece about software. One could get into the argument that, well, digital mixers really are software mixers as well, because they do run on some form of an operating system themselves. Just like people with video switchers nowadays, they could use the same argument. I got into a discussion, I won't call it an argument, I got into a discussion with a volunteer at one of the churches that I've helped about the Blackmagic ATEM television studio. Is it a software switcher or is it a hardware switcher? He was coming from the standpoint it's a hardware switcher because what you plug stuff into is hardware. And my argument was, yeah, but you can't control the thing without software. So at that point, it's as reliable as a software switcher. I've seen $25,000 broadcast pick switchers that run on a dedicated, or Windows is installed on a dedicated ROM chip or whatever on the motherboard, freeze up 3 times in the same program. Now, I don't know about you. If I'm spending 25 grand on a video switcher, it shouldn't be doing that ever, right? And so that was kind of a wake-up call to me to say, you know what? If it's software and I have the option for about the same price, I'm going to go hardware. And I think for me, the argument is, okay, yeah, there's software that the digital audio mixer runs on, but it's built for the purpose, number one. Number two, it's not always going out to the internet looking for updates and installing updates without your permission. And 3, it's just stable. You don't have any of that, probably. I don't know. I'm maybe speaking out of turn here, but or out of ignorance, but it doesn't have to worry about Java and Flash and all of these other, shall we call them, runtimes. that environments that kind of plague modern computing, or at least they can. So in my opinion, that just makes them ultra reliable. Paul?
Well, there's a couple of things. First off, all we use in our online campus is the Blackmagic line of switchers. We've got both the Television Studio and the 4K. And while you can control those with a computer off-board, they do make a surface, a control surface that will control them. It's just a bazillion dollars. Like, you can buy 20 computers, have them all lined up, all with the software. If one goes down, you throw it away, and then you plug in the second one for less money than getting this control surface, which I really want because it's so much easier to use. So, yeah. But one thing that I think is, it's a tool that, 20 years ago, very few people would have thought was the future, and that's Linux and Unix. That these operating systems are built off of either the Linux open source system or FreeBSD or Unix. They sometimes take a while to boot up, but once they do, they're much more solid than some other systems. So I think that there are ways that you can get past this, where one of the advantages of OS X is it's built on FreeBSD, which is a Linux Unix variant. One of the advantages of Linux is that it's basically Unix. It's an open source version. So we see that there are some alternatives. It's not all Mac is the only way to go, although it's what I use and I prefer. But I do think when you're thinking of how you control any equipment, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and for some equipment, the weak link is the user interface. And if the machine works perfectly fine, but you can't control it, then what good does that do you? I mean, it's the same as the machine being totally broken. We've got a piece in our production workflow right now called it's by Coolux. It's called the Pandora's Box, and it does a bazillion things, and we keep it completely off the network because the control interface is Windows XP. And just the moment that you put that on the network, it's going to want to find an update. If the firewall isn't completely secured, someone's going to find it and put malware on it. There's just a bazillion things that can go wrong, and if this thing wasn't so powerful, they didn't ask me if they should buy it because everything else we have is Mac, and I just think that maybe there was another option. But that is just, I guess, across the board, look for the weak links in your system and try and shore those up or have redundancies or something. If your only plan is to use an iPad to run your sound, at least have two iPads, and when the new version of iOS comes out, don't upgrade them both. It probably will work, but what if it doesn't? So you've got to think redundancy, you've got to think what's my weak link and how do I get past that weakness.
Yeah, I agree. And just a quick side note, the Pandora's Box is actually an industry standard in live event and touring applications, but probably because they don't put it on the network connected to the internet. That's just my little side note there. So summing up, um, we've got digital mixers with all sorts of included processing power, compressors, limiters, gates, effects, um, an increased number of auxiliary sends, which gives you greater flexibility in routing signals from the board and providing different mixes to different places. Scene recall, and one other feature that I think is rather unique. Once you start getting into the larger channel counts, especially 24, 32, that kind of thing, um, I'm not sure what your guys' experience is, but my experience with larger channel count boards is such that the power supplies for those things are like bricks. They're huge. And I don't understand why. I mean, why is it that an analog board that's 32 channels needs a power brick this big, right? But a digital mixer that's 32 channels needs just a standard IEC computer power cord. I don't understand that. Maybe one of you can explain it to me, but to me that's a big disadvantage to analog boards, but a huge advantage to digital.
I have a theory.
I was gonna, yeah, I think I know the problem with that is like I should have said this. I was gonna say this, but like I said about the PreSonus, with the preamps, it's like the thing about a really nice preamp is the power supply, of course, because it's active. So each one of those preamps have to be powered, effectively and efficiently. And they probably give them more power than they need just for safety. I'm thinking maybe I'm wrong. I'm not sure how much these is compared to like I would like in my studio. Like if I was, when I record vocals, I plug it up into a nice preamp, and that preamp, oh my lord, it's maybe like this, but the power supply takes up like half of it, because it takes up a lot of power to push that preamp, to get those tubes going and everything. And so I'm thinking, to answer your question, I think a lot of that has to do with the preamps and some other circuitry in there that needs more power for each channel. So that's what I was going to say.
I think there's a piece too of while alternating current is great for sending electricity over long distances, we do so much, especially in electronics circles, with DC that I think a analog board probably does a lot more with direct current, and you gotta change all that analog or all that AC to DC, and the more channels you have, the more you're going to use. So I think it's not the case that an analog board is just a passive set of pots and faders. There's some stuff going on under the hood. That's why they're so expensive. It's not, oh, go to Radio Shack and pick up 4 different pots and stick them on a circuit board, and you got yourself a 1-channel mixer. Now just make 16 of those bad boys, and for $25, you've got a 16-channel mixer. No, it's not that easy. If it was, there wouldn't be a market for great analog boards. There never would have been, because take a week and build your own. But it's much more involved, and I think that's probably why these power supplies are so big. They need to do a lot of changing of the AC to the DC. Again, could be wrong, but that's my gut.
That makes sense. So essentially, if it was easy, everybody would do it. So, well, I think that will close us off, guys. Any final thoughts?
Well, I'm just excited about all the stuff that I've learned here. I hadn't even considered a small digital mixer for my own use, but thinking about it, maybe there's like a an 8 channel or a 16 channel that once I factored in the price of some of the effects that I'd like to get, it just makes a lot of sense. So I think that that's something for maybe smaller or portable churches to think is, sure, maybe you can pick up a used analog board for a good price, but maybe once you add in gates, maybe once you add in compressors, once you add in a few of these things, you start to realize, oh, yeah, used, old, warm sound, those are all pluses, but maybe I do need something digital. So, good discussion.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I can see that Michael's there actively looking for something.
I was gonna add at the end of this, because this is, I like how Tim said, last time we had talked on the video chat, is that everything that we do, like I'm in ministry, that's part of everything I am. Of course, I have my IT to make money, but I love music. I love it. I like writing music, and I love worshiping. I love doing that for my Father in heaven, and we do all this for the glory of God. And so, considering this is church tech, we got to keep in mind, and I'd say this to everybody watching this video, is that we're doing all this for the glory of God. We're doing this all for the kingdom of heaven and what God is doing in our country, in the whole world. And God does use this equipment, and He wants us to use it right for His glory. A lot of people probably know what God is doing in America. It's getting kind of popular. A lot of the 24-hour prayer and worship stuff that's going on around the world. Numbers are getting bigger. They're growing a lot more now. It's not just about church. It's about, the house of David and stuff. And a lot of these churches are getting into, hey, we want to record what's going on. We want to show people around the world, what we're doing and what God's doing to people, and showing what the media or what we see on TV these days. They just don't broadcast it. It seems just like, media just these days they broadcast all the bad stuff. And it's like, why aren't you broadcasting the good stuff that God is doing in this country, like blessing people, like supernatural stuff? And the problem is, let's not rely on media. Let's rely on other channels that God can use. And I think we're getting really big at the point now where people are really wanting to record what's going on. Like at the Boiler Room, I think I put it on Google Plus, where we want to start recording all our sessions. Nice video, nice audio, and putting it on a streaming service. Even if I have to design a website myself and put it on a server somewhere, that's what I'm going to do, because I want people to see in the raw essence of what God is doing around this country, but all the good things He's doing, all the righteous stuff. So just keep that in mind, like, God, we're doing all this for the glory of God, and so just keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I just want to add on to that. I think we stress this pretty regularly in these HOAs, but, if you can't give your best for God, then who are you giving your best for, if anybody? And that's not meant as a guilt trip. It's reality, honestly. If maybe you're burned out, because you're the only tech. If you're burned out and you're not passionate about it and it's not exciting for you anymore, then maybe it's time to take a break. Not to say that there's anything wrong with you. It's just, it's tech. We get burned out. There's nothing wrong with that. Get some help. I think that's one of the hardest things for us to do, is to ask for help. They say the shortest distance between, what is it, you and God is the distance between your knees and the floor, something like that. So I don't know where that came from, but maybe somebody out there needed to hear that. But yeah, I just want to kind of leave the topic with, if you're evaluating different boards, be them analog or digital, make sure that the interface is easy to use and is easy to learn and easy to teach. Because at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to be using it, and you're likely going to be one of the people, if not the person, that's going to be teaching it to others. So if you're making sure that you understand or can easily grasp the interface, then I would say that should be a pretty big factor, regardless of whether it's an analog or a digital board. Because all the features in the world are great, but if you don't understand how to use them, this kind of dovetails about what we were talking about in another HOA this week, and that is ongoing training. You know, if a good piece of equipment should stretch you, should stretch your abilities, should stretch your knowledge, give you room to grow in your knowledge and your experience. And you know, if all you're doing is flatlining as far as the status quo with your church and your tech equipment, I don't know. I'm just going to throw that out there. What does that mean? And I'm not going to answer that. I'm not going to have the guys answer that. I'm just going to put it out to you, internet viewer. What does that mean? Define that. Talk about it with your crew, with your leadership. See what happens. Anyway, I want to thank Michael and Paul for being with me, and thanks for watching. And if you are watching this and you're not part of the Google Plus communities, Adventist Church Tech or Church Tech, two separate groups, go ahead and join in. You know, it's free to join, doesn't cost you anything. We do stuff like this all the time, and we'd love to have you in there contributing, telling us what your experiences, your stories are like, and you know, they are communities of encouragement, and we definitely want to invite you to join in so that you can be supported by fellow techs. So God bless, and we'll see you next time.